Hey guys, today I'm going to do something different and talk purely about decision making in Gwent and how to get better at it. Now, this is going to be useful for both beginners but also intermediate players and those who struggle working out how to find the best play, basically. Um, Effectively, I'm going to outline a path of decisions which should be followed for each decision you make in a game, and this will help you to eliminate any misplays and hopefully improve your game considerably. After enough time and practice, these thought processes will happen without you having to think about them, but it's something that's not often talked about, so I thought I'd share my thoughts. Now, a quick disclaimer, this guide won't allow you to play perfectly in Gwent. It'll be more a shell of knowledge, which will properly enable, your experience of the game, matchups, and your own ability to make judgments concerning your opponent's cards, effectively. That being said, let's jump right into it. So, first step. When making a decision as to what card to play in any given situation, the first thing to consider is the bigger picture of the game and our general strategy in the current round we're playing. Now, obviously, this is going to vary depending on many factors, including coin flip, matchup, and deck. For example, we might see that we've lost the coin flip and so need to maintain enough tempo to not get behind two cards, right? Alternatively, we might find ourselves in round two, being able to bleed our opponent to one card so that we can finish the game out with a nice power play in round three. Now, this step, this sort of general strategy and thinking around that is obviously going to rely pretty heavily on basic understanding of the game and the current meta decks, but it's going to underpin the other steps that I'll outline here. So, step two, blacklisting any cards that we cannot play in the current situation. I say blacklisting, this just means, we're gonna eliminate them from the decision-making process, effectively. And this is going to make decision making a lot easier and will avoid making any large misplay, playing our win condition round one or playing a dead Freya, Priestess of Freya, or something like that. So these blacklisted cards are going to include any that do not fit with the larger strategic goal that we talked about in round one. So any card that would cause you to go two cards down in round one, for example, because it's not enough tempo. You can also blacklist any cards which, lose a huge amount of value if played in the current round or situation. So a good example of this is resurrection effects when you have no graveyard, and Geralt Igni if they don't have 25 points on their row, right? And the final final type of card we can blacklist from our decision is any finisher that we need to save for later in the game. This is particularly important, as not having finisher will lose you a lot of games. If you're just throwing that out in round one, probably not a good idea. And this can also, it can also be cards which are just pivotal to winning a matchup. So things like having removal for Villain Trettenmirth if your opponent's going to have that, or saving Cyrenova for round three, that sort of thing. Okay, so once we've eliminated the cards which are bad to play in the current situation, comes step three. We have to consider the opponent's hand and their future plays, okay? So we need to assess what the opponent is likely to play next, and whether or not this will disrupt our strategy, and whether or not we can disrupt theirs. So the obvious example of this is when your opponent sets up a Juicy, Igni, or Scorch, right? But it could be as simple as recognizing your opponent has like an Eorveth in hand, and then not playing your 8 strength engine, right? To give that full value. Now, if it turns out we can disrupt the opponent's plays, then that might lock in our decision for a given play right here. So in step three, it'll be only the case though when it's super important to make that specific play. So avoiding that Scorch or Igni, that's kind of the main thing. Or like any other card, It is important to keep in mind that the first step, general strategy should still be considered when making that decision though. So for example, it might be more important to establish carryover in round two when you're being bled, than playing around the Scorch because the points might not matter too much. It might be you need to set up carryover rather than caring about points. Okay. So now that we have or haven't, played around a potential threat from the opponent, we can go on to step four, and this is maximizing value in line with the general strategic game plan. So this sounds complex, but effectively, we have to work out the play which will get us as many points as possible while keeping in mind all of the previous steps. So this is basically, the micro management sort of level, how we're maximizing our points. So, while getting, the most points from the player is important, if we ignore the general game plan, then, we could end up with no finishes for round three, and our strongest cards will probably get wasted. So effectively, this is, the thinking behind the round, the round mechanic in Gwent, really. If you throw too many resources into one round, then you could lose the future ones. So since we've blacklisted our finishers and, potential removal, if they don't have things to remove, card advantage spy, if it's awkward, we can blacklist all those cards from the decision. We're probably left with some, pure setup plays and then some raw point plays that we don't need to keep for later on. Now, generally speaking, we want to use our engines and setup plays before our raw point cards because these engines will then get more points as the round goes on. So engines include weather, things that synergize with other cards you play in your deck, and cards that just get value the longer the round goes on. So effectively any card that will get you more value the earlier you play it, that's an engine card. So we want to use engines first, obviously, because then we'll get more value, and that'll help us, maximize our points over a long round. And now after we've used engines and all of that, we can also think about disrupting our opponent's engines. These things, you've got to do simultaneously. So it might be more points to disrupt an opponent's engine. Say it's getting 2 points a turn, it's weather, for example. We could clear that weather before, establishing our own engine that's giving us 1 point a turn, say a Dragoon or a Trebuchet, that sort of thing. So yeah, maximizing value is going to involve both disrupting the opponent's engines and establishing our own. And after we've done all of that, we're going to do those things first most of the time, right? Because that's going to be the most value, the most points we can accrue in a long round. After we've done that, we can just play out our raw points, which are going to be, your general bronze core, maybe a few silvers as well. And of course, the general thinking is that you should play your least valuable cards first if your game plan affords for it, right? You don't want to go with super low tempo if that's going to cost you, your strategic goals. But if you can, then you're able to save better cards for later on, and that's going to be a good thing. And this brings us to step 5, which is pivotal decisions. So there's going to come a point where we've played all of the, non-blacklisted cards in the hand, and we have to make a pretty important decision at this point. So we either have to pass or we have to play one of these blacklisted cards, at an inopportune time, effectively. And this is going to depend on the situation, obviously, and in certain cases, playing a blacklisted card is going to be the only option. Say, like in round 2, if you're being bled and your opponent's forcing you to play a finisher, you got to suck it up, you got to play your finisher, that's what you got to do. Alternatively, maybe it's round 1, you're getting pushed, you're on even cards, and you're going to lose the round on even if you don't play another card. But one of those cards is your finisher. Maybe you don't want to do that. So it's a tricky decision that has to be made. And there's no easy rule of thumb as to whether, passing or playing at this point is better. But generally speaking, if it is possible to exit a round with card advantage, that is then going to be better than playing one of the blacklisted cards in general. So keep that in mind. Obviously, like there can be very tough situations, if you're losing on even cards, you have to either go 2 down potentially, or you have to lose on even, or you have to use a finisher. It's not exactly ideal, but that's really when the higher level sort of gameplay kicks in, right? Knowing which of those options is better. So yeah, I know this has all been quite theoretical, but hopefully not too confusing, and I hope it helps some people. As I said before, these steps are just the shell of the decision-making process in Gwent. So you need to kind of fill that shell out yourself with, knowledge of matchups and cards, for it to pay off. And knowing the process itself won't win you any games. It'll only help you to like avoid misplays, basically. Anyhow, that's gonna be me done for today. And I hope you guys have a lovely time, a great day, a good Gwenting experience, and I'll see you next time.